Gavin thought changing the smart lock code to our penthouse would stop me from ruining his trip to Miami with his mistress. He left me trapped in a blizzard with our feverish son, convinced he held all the cards. But he forgot that a mother's rage is far more dangerous than the storm outside. By the time he reached the airport, my best friend had already turned his little vacation into a felony investigation. My name is Mallory, and I never realized how much a luxury penthouse could feel like a mausoleum until the heating vents started rattling against the Chicago wind. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass of the Sterling Heights Tower, the city was disappearing behind a white curtain of snow. The weatherman had called it the storm of the decade, with temperatures plummeting to 10 below zero. But the real chill was right here in the master bedroom. My son, Noah, was 4 years old, and he was burning alive in my arms. His small body was jerking with the rhythm of a fever that had just spiked to 103.1 degrees Fahrenheit. I was frantic, tearing through the bathroom vanity, sweeping expensive lotions and designer soaps into the sink in a desperate search for the children's ibuprofen. The bottle was empty. I shook it upside down, praying for a single drop. But there was nothing. I ran back into the bedroom, clutching Noah against my chest. I told Gavin we needed to go to the emergency room immediately. Noah was twitching again, his eyes rolling back slightly. Gavin stood by the walk-in closet, adjusting the silk tie that perfectly matched his navy bespoke suit. He did not look at us. He was focused on his reflection, carefully spritzing a cloud of sandalwood cologne around his neck. He told me to calm down, claiming he had a flight to catch for an urgent business trip to Seattle. He said the partners were waiting and he could not miss this merger meeting for a common cold. I saw his jacket thrown across the bed. I grabbed it, intending to find his car keys since he was clearly useless. But my fingers brushed against stiff paper in the inner pocket. I pulled out the boarding passes. They were not for Seattle. They were first-class tickets to Miami, departing in 2 hours, and there were 2 of them, one for Gavin, and one for a passenger named Tiffany LaRue. I threw the tickets at his feet. The paper fluttered down onto the plush carpet. I screamed at him, asking how he could think of vacationing with his mistress while his son was convulsing in my arms. Gavin finally turned to face me, and the look in his eyes was not guilt. It was annoyance. He sighed, looking at his watch, and told me I was being hysterical. He said Noah just had the flu and I was blowing things out of proportion just to sabotage his relaxation time. He actually called it relaxation time. I did not waste another second arguing with a monster. I hoisted Noah onto my hip, grabbed my purse, and ran for the front door. I punched in the code, but the panel flashed a harsh red light. I tried again. Denied. I ran to the private elevator doors in the foyer and pressed the call button, but the panel was dead. I looked back at Gavin. He was holding his phone, tapping the screen with a bored expression. He had used his administrator access to the smart home system to put the penthouse into total lockdown. I reached for my own phone to call 911, but Gavin was faster. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, snatched the device from my trembling hand, and walked over to the saltwater aquarium built into the living room wall. With a casual flick of his wrist, he dropped my phone into the tank. It sank past the coral, bubbling as it died. He walked over to the wall and yanked the cord of the landline phone, severing the connection. He put his coat on, checking his appearance one last time in the hallway mirror. He told me to stay put until he got back next week and warned me not to cause a scene. He said I needed a time out to think about my attitude. Then, he walked to the service exit, the only door that opened with a physical key, and slipped out. I heard the heavy steel bolt slide into place from the outside. The silence that followed was deafening. We were trapped in a glass box 80 stories above the ground. I ran to the window and pounded my fists against the reinforced hurricane-proof glass, screaming for help until my throat tasted like blood. But the wind outside was howling louder than I ever could, swallowing my voice. Below me, the city lights were blurring out. In my arms, Noah whimpered and his head lulled back, his skin radiating heat like a furnace as the delirium set in. I forced myself to stop screaming. Panic was a luxury I could not afford, not when Noah was burning up in my arms. I carried him into the bathroom, laying him on the plush bath mat. His skin was mottled and dry, radiating heat like a stone left in the desert sun. I ran the tap, testing the water until it was lukewarm, not cold, because I knew shocking his system could make the seizures worse. I soaked a washcloth and dabbed his forehead, his neck, and under his arms. I whispered to him constantly, telling him Mommy was here, but his eyes remained glazed, staring at something I could not see. Despite my efforts, the heat coming off him felt undiminished. He was not cooling down. I needed to call for help. I left Noah safely on the rug for 10 seconds and sprinted into the living room, tearing through the drawers where we kept our electronics. Empty. I ran to the home office. The desk was bare. Gavin had been thorough. He had taken my laptop, the family iPad, and even the old emergency burner phone we kept in the kitchen drawer. He had stripped the apartment of every communication device, ensuring our isolation was absolute. I ran back to Noah, tears stinging my eyes. As I knelt beside him, my knee knocked against his toy chest, a large wooden pirate trunk at the foot of his bed. A memory flashed in my mind. 2 years ago, I had tossed my old smartwatch in there after the strap snapped during a marathon. I had bought a new one and let Noah play with the old face as a pretend spy gadget. I scrambled over to the chest, digging through piles of plastic bricks, stuffed dinosaurs, and broken race cars. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the toys. Please be there. Please have a charge. My fingers brushed against cool metal and cracked glass at the very bottom. I pulled it out. The screen was shattered in the corner where Noah had banged it against the floor. But when I pressed the side button, a faint low battery icon appeared. It had 5% battery life remaining. It was not connected to the Wi-Fi, which Gavin had cut. But this model had an independent cellular plan. An eSIM I had never bothered to cancel because the monthly fee was negligible. I prayed the signal could penetrate the storm and the steel structure of the building. I tapped the screen to bring up the phone app, but the touch sensors were dead. The shattered glass had rendered the display useless. I felt a sob rising in my throat, but swallowed it down. I held the side button, activating the voice assistant. The spinning circle appeared, lagging and glitching. "Call Beatrice," I commanded, my voice trembling. The watch processed for a terrifyingly long second. Then, I heard the faint, rhythmic trill of a dial tone. Beatrice picked up on the second ring. Her voice was sharp and clear, a stark contrast to the chaos in my world. She asked what was up, likely expecting me to complain about Gavin missing dinner again. I could not keep the terror out of my voice. I told her Gavin had locked us in. I told her Noah was seizing and had a fever over 103. I told her Gavin was on his way to O'Hare Airport right now with a mistress. I heard the shift in her tone immediately. The lawyer in her took over. She did not waste time asking how or why. She asked if Noah was breathing. I told her yes, but barely. Beatrice spoke with a command that cut through my panic. She told me to listen to her carefully. She said she was calling 911 on her other line and dispatching them to my address. She told me she was getting in her car and coming to break that door down herself if she had to. She ordered me to keep Noah warm and stay low. Before I could say thank you, the watch screen went black. The 5% was gone. I stared at the dead piece of metal in my hand, feeling the connection to the outside world sever. Then, as if Gavin had been waiting for that exact moment of hope to extinguish it, a heavy click echoed through the penthouse. The lights in the bathroom died. The hallway went black. The heating vents stopped their low hum. Gavin had accessed the main breaker through the app and killed the power. I was plunged into absolute darkness. I crawled back to Noah, finding him by the heat radiating from his small body. I pulled him into my lap, wrapping my own body around him to share warmth as the temperature in the room began to drop rapidly. We were alone in the dark, waiting for a savior, or for the end. The sound of sirens slicing through the silence of the blizzard was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It started as a faint wail and grew into a deafening symphony of justice that surrounded the Sterling Heights tower. From the floor of the dark living room, I saw the strobe of red and blue lights bouncing off the snow swirling outside the windows. Moments later, the heavy thud of a battering ram echoed through the penthouse, followed by the splintering of wood and the twisting of metal. The front door, the one Gavin had so arrogantly secured with his digital lock, was blasted off its hinges. Beatrice stepped through the debris first, flanking a tactical team of firefighters and police officers. She looked like a warrior in her trench coat, her eyes scanning the dark room until they landed on me. The medics rushed past her, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. They swarmed Noah, assessing his vitals with practiced efficiency. When they strapped the oxygen mask over his small, pale face, the dam finally broke inside me. I sobbed, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer relief of seeing my son breathing oxygen that felt safe. While the paramedics loaded Noah onto a stretcher, a police officer crouched beside me, taking a rapid statement. I told him everything. I told him about the locked doors, the cut phone lines, the fever, and the threats. Beatrice stood over us, her voice cold and precise. She told the officer that this was unlawful imprisonment and child endangerment. She demanded they put out an all-points bulletin for Gavin immediately, giving them his license plate and vehicle description. 30 miles away, on the slushy tarmac of the Kennedy Expressway heading toward O'Hare International Airport, Gavin was living in a different reality. I later watched the dashcam footage that captured his downfall. He was driving his silver sports car, one hand on the wheel and the other gesturing as he laughed over the speakerphone with Tiffany. He was telling her about the suite he had booked, joking that he had left the nanny in charge of the house. He had no idea that the nanny was actually his wife fighting for their son's life. Then the lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Not just one cruiser, but 3, boxing him in against the concrete divider. He pulled over, annoyed rather than afraid. The footage showed him stepping out of the car into the freezing wind, his coat flapping. He walked toward the officers with that trademark arrogance, shouting at them for delaying a VIP traveler. He asked if they knew who he was and threatened to have their badges. The sergeant didn't blink. He informed Gavin that he was a suspect in an active domestic violence and kidnapping investigation. Gavin actually laughed. He rolled his eyes and tried to play the victim. He told the police that his wife was hysterical, suffering from some mental break, and that he had only locked the doors to keep her from running out into the storm. He called it a safety measure. That was when the sergeant held up his phone. Beatrice was on the line. She had forwarded the audio file from my watch call to the dispatch. The recording played loud and clear over the wind my terrified plea, Noah's pained whimpers, and the undeniable context of a woman trapped. Gavin's face went as white as the snow around him. The officers didn't waste another second. They spun him around and slammed him onto the hood of his precious car. The cold metal must have shocked him, but the click of the handcuffs was the real wake-up call. While he sputtered protests, another officer opened the trunk to search his luggage. They pulled out the suitcase, and for all the passing cars to see, they revealed the contents: expensive lace lingerie, jewelry boxes from Tiffany & Co., and magnum bottles of champagne. None of it was for his wife. I was sitting in the back of the ambulance, holding Noah's hand as the paramedic adjusted his IV drip, when a notification popped up on the medic's tablet. The arrest had been live-streamed by a passerby and was already trending on local feeds. I saw the thumbnail of Gavin, face pressed against the hood of his car, looking small and pathetic. The fear that had gripped my heart for the last 3 hours began to harden into something else. It turned into a cold, heavy knot of hatred. He had left us to die for a weekend of pleasure. I squeezed Noah's hand gently and promised myself that Gavin would never control a single door in our lives ever again. The sterile silence of room 412 at St. Jude Hospital was broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor. Noah was sleeping, his small chest rising and falling with a heavy, rattling sound that tore at my heart. The doctors had stabilized him, but the prolonged exposure to the freezing temperatures in the penthouse had developed into acute pneumonia. I sat in the hard plastic chair next to his bed, holding his hand, watching the oxygen mist fog up the plastic mask covering his nose and mouth. I felt hollowed out, as if the adrenaline from the rescue had burned away everything inside me, leaving only a cold, gray ash. Beatrice entered the room quietly, closing the door behind her to block out the hallway noise. She did not offer empty platitudes or a shoulder to cry on. Instead, she placed a garment bag and a thick manila folder on the tray table. She told me that I needed to shower and change because looking like a victim would not help us now. She informed me that Gavin had made bail. The high-priced legal team from Obsidian Dynamics had swarmed the precinct and had him released in under 2 hours. She warned me that he was on his way here and that I needed to be ready to fight a war, not just a battle. I had just finished changing into the fresh blouse and slacks Beatrice brought when I heard the commotion in the hallway. Gavin appeared, looking disheveled in a way that seemed carefully calculated. His tie was loosened, his hair messily swept back, and his face wore a mask of frantic concern. He was performing the role of the terrified father for the nurses and the hospital staff. He rushed toward the room, his arms reaching out as if to embrace me and the tragedy we supposedly shared. I stepped into the doorway, blocking his path. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked him directly in the eyes, and I felt my soul harden into ice. He stopped, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. I leaned in close so no one else could hear and whispered that he had died to me the moment he engaged that lock. I told him that the man standing in front of me was a stranger and a monster. Gavin's expression shifted instantly from concern to a sneer. He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, and hissed that I was being paranoid. He tried to twist reality, claiming that he had locked the doors for my own safety because I was acting hysterical. He said the smart home system must have glitched and that he would never intentionally hurt his son. He told me that I was unwell and that I was imagining things, trying to make me question my own sanity. While he was spinning his web of lies, the plastic bag of personal effects that the police had returned to me sat on the bedside table. They had confiscated his phone as evidence but returned it to me as his next of kin after extracting the data they needed. Or perhaps it was just an oversight in the chaos. Regardless, it was in my possession. The screen lit up with a notification. I picked it up. Gavin tried to snatch it, but I stepped back. The message was from a contact saved as Tiff. It read, "Have you dealt with that old hag yet? I am bored waiting at the terminal." I looked at the timestamp. It was sent 2 minutes ago. This was not just a fling. This was not a moment of weakness. Tiffany LaRue, a 24-year-old Instagram model, was waiting for him to discard me so she could take my place. He had left his son to die not just for a vacation, but for a replacement strategy. I knew his passcode. It was the date he founded his company, the only thing he truly loved. I unlocked the phone and opened his banking app. My breath hitched. There were transfers made over the last 6 months. $5,000 here, $10,000 there. All of it moved from our joint savings account into an account under Tiffany's name. He was funding his future life with her using the money we had saved for Noah's college education. Gavin stared at me, a flicker of fear finally crossing his face as he realized I held his unlocked life in my hands. I looked from the phone to my sleeping son, and then back to my husband. A scream built in my chest, but I swallowed it. Screaming would get me a divorce and a pitiable settlement. Silence, however, would get me everything. I decided then and there that I would not leave him. Not yet. I would stay. I would play the part of the confused, traumatized wife, and I would dismantle his life brick by brick until he had nothing left but the ash I felt inside me. The penthouse still smelled faintly of the sandalwood cologne Gavin wore the night he locked us in, a scent that used to remind me of safety but now made my stomach turn. I brought Noah home 3 days later, carrying him past the replaced front door. I decided to play the role Gavin expected of me. I spent my days in a bathrobe, shuffling through the hallways with unwashed hair and hollow eyes, barely speaking above a whisper. I let him see a broken woman, a wife so traumatized by the accident with the smart lock that she had lost her will to fight. It worked. Gavin stopped looking at me with suspicion and started looking at me with contempt. He believed he had won. He believed his high-priced lawyers had smoothed over the police report, reducing the charges to a misunderstanding that would disappear with a few donations to the police benevolent fund. With his guard down, Gavin resumed his arrogance. He began staying late at the office again, telling me he was fixing the PR disaster caused by his arrest. In reality, he was meeting Tiffany. He was promising her that he was just finalizing the divorce settlement to ensure I got nothing, and then they would be free to leave for Miami. He had no idea that every time he left the building, a private investigator hired by Beatrice was trailing his silver sports car, while Gavin was busy planning his future. I was busy digging up his past. I met Beatrice and a forensic accountant named Marcus in a secure conference room at her firm. We laid out the financial entrails of Obsidian Dynamics, the company my father had built from the ground up and left to me, which I had foolishly allowed Gavin to manage. Marcus was a man of few words, but his findings screamed. He slid a stack of documents across the mahogany table. They were loan applications and mortgage refinancings, all signed by me, except I had never seen them before. Gavin had been forging my signature for 5 years. He had leveraged the penthouse, our vacation home, and the company assets to secure loans totaling over $12 million. We traced the money. It did not go into research or development. Half of it had vanished into speculative cryptocurrency markets, dissolved into nothingness during the last crash. The other half had gone to Miami. Gavin had purchased a waterfront villa for $4.5 million. The deed was not in his name, nor was it in the company's name. It belonged to Tiffany LaRue. Further digging revealed that Tiffany was not just a pretty face he was sleeping with, she was a participant in his crimes. Beatrice discovered that Tiffany owned a shell company, a modeling agency that had never booked a single model but received monthly consulting fees of $50,000 from Obsidian Dynamics. It was a classic money laundering scheme to siphon my father's legacy into their pockets. That night, I waited until Gavin was asleep in the guest room he claimed he couldn't sleep in the master bedroom because of my bad energy. I crept into his home office. I knew he kept a floor safe under the Persian rug, but he had changed the combination. However, he was a creature of habit and arrogance. I lifted the loose floorboard next to the safe, a hiding spot he used to use for his weed stash in college. There it was, not the drugs, but a sleek black tablet. I took it to the bathroom and locked the door. It unlocked with his Face ID, which I bypassed using a high-resolution photo I had printed from his social media, a trick the private investigator taught me. The tablet was a digital confession. It contained chat logs, offshore bank account access, and plans for the Miami relocation. But the last file I opened made the blood freeze in my veins. It was a PDF from an insurance brokerage. 2 months ago, Gavin had taken out a new life insurance policy. The coverage was massive, $10 million on my life and $5 million on Noah's life. The beneficiary for both was Gavin. The policy had a double indemnity clause for accidental death in the home. I sat on the cold tile floor, staring at the screen until the numbers blurred, the locked doors, the cut phone lines, the refusal to take a sick child to the hospital. It wasn't just negligence or cruelty. He hadn't just been trying to go on vacation. He had been hoping we wouldn't survive the night. He wasn't just a cheater and a thief. He was calculating our worth in death. I agreed to meet Tiffany LaRue at Le Monde, a cafe so pretentious they served water in crystal goblets, not because I wanted to hear her apology, but because I knew her ego was a ticking time bomb waiting to be detonated. She arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car and looking every bit the part of the triumphant mistress. She did not order coffee. She ordered champagne at 11 in the morning and sat across from me with a smile that showed too many teeth. Tiffany did not waste time with pleasantries. She leaned over the marble table, her eyes scanning my face for wrinkles, and told me that I looked tired. She said that Gavin needed a woman who could keep up with his energy, not a washed-up housewife who belonged in a retirement home. Then, she extended her hand to inspect her manicure, flashing a diamond ring that was roughly the size of a quail egg. It was a solitaire cut, flawless and obscene. I recognized the invoice amount from the forensic accounting report. That ring cost $55,000. That was the exact amount we had set aside for Noah's private school tuition for the next 2 years. I did not get angry. Anger is messy, and I needed to be precise. I had my phone placed face down on the table between us, the voice memo app recording every syllable in high definition. I took a slow sip of my black coffee and asked her if she was worried about the legal troubles Gavin was facing. Tiffany laughed, a shrill sound that made the other patrons look over. She boasted that Gavin was a genius. She told me that the police were stupid and that Gavin had already moved the assets where no one could touch them. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially, but still loud enough for the microphone. She bragged that the Miami villa was in her name for a reason, and that the money flowing through her modeling agency was untraceable. She actually used the words clever accounting to describe felony embezzlement. I looked her dead in the eye and decided to pull the pin. I asked her if she was sure Gavin actually loved her, or if he just needed someone with a clean record to sign her name on his illegal debts. I asked her what she thought would happen to her when the IRS audited her fake company. The smile vanished from her face instantly. Her eyes narrowed, and her face turned a blotchy shade of red. She stood up, screaming that I was just jealous and bitter. Then, in a moment of pure, unadulterated trashiness, she grabbed her goblet of water and threw the contents into my face. The ice water dripped down my nose and soaked into my blouse. The cafe went silent. Every eye was on us. Above our heads, the red light of the security camera blinked steadily. I calmly picked up a napkin and dried my cheek. I smiled at her, a genuine smile this time, and thanked her for the assault charge. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and walked out, leaving her standing there with the empty glass and a room full of witnesses whispering about her behavior. When I got home, Gavin was waiting in the living room. He looked at my damp shirt but didn't ask what happened. He was in a good mood, pacing the floor with a stack of documents in his hand. He saw my silence as submission. He thought he had broken me. He handed me the papers and a pen. He told me that the company was in trouble because of the bad press from his arrest and that we needed to restructure. He said the only way to save Obsidian Dynamics was for me to sign over my controlling shares to him for a nominal fee of $10 so he could shield the assets. It was a laughable attempt at theft. He wanted to steal my father's company for the price of a sandwich. I took the papers and looked at them. Inside, I was screaming, but on the outside, I made my hands tremble just enough to look pathetic. I told him I was just so tired and confused. I said I wanted to help, but I needed a few days to read through the legal language because my head was still spinning from the stress. Gavin rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed that I hadn't signed immediately, but his arrogance blinded him. He patted my shoulder with a condescending touch and told me to take my time. As long as I signed by Friday, he thought he was giving me a grace period. He did not realize he was giving me the time I needed to sharpen the guillotine. Noah came home on a Tuesday afternoon, pale but breathing without the rattle that had haunted my nightmares for a week. The moment Gavin walked into the nursery to play the role of the doting father, Noah scrambled backward on his bed, pressing his small spine against the wall. He pointed a shaking finger at his father and screamed that Daddy locked him. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Gavin flinched, his eyes darting to me, then back to the boy. I saw the mask slip. He realized Noah was not just a child anymore. He was a liability, a witness who was getting louder. That night, he told me we were attending the Obsidian Gala on Saturday. He said we needed to present a united front to the investors to calm the rumors. He wanted to show off his new project, a renewable energy initiative that I knew was nothing more than a vaporware smokescreen for his exit strategy. Wednesday morning. Beatrice called me on the secure line while I was in the garden. The forensic accounting was complete. We had him. The Economic Crimes Division had reviewed the files from the tablet and the bank records. They had enough to charge him with embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. They wanted to arrest him at the house, but I asked them to wait. I told Beatrice I wanted him to be on stage. I wanted him to be at his highest point when the ground crumbled beneath him. I wanted the world to see him fall, not just a few neighbors peering through their blinds. The night of the gala arrived. Gavin expected me to wear something demure. Perhaps the beige chiffon gown he had bought me last Christmas to make me fade into the background. Instead, I chose a dress I had bought in secret. It was crimson red, silk, structured and sharp, with a neckline that demanded attention and a silhouette that screamed power. When I walked into the living room, Gavin paused while adjusting his diamond cufflinks. He looked me up and down, a deep frown creasing his forehead. He asked if I thought it was too much. I smiled and told him that tonight was a celebration, wasn't it? I told him I wanted to look my best for his big moment. He shrugged, his arrogance dismissing the warning sign. He was too focused on his speech to notice that his wife had stopped being a victim. Before we left, I made one final arrangement. I used a burner email account to send a digital VIP invitation to Tiffany LaRue. The message simply said that Gavin was planning to announce their engagement tonight and that she needed to be there to claim her place. It was the match that would light the fuse. At the same time, I hit send on a scheduled email blast addressed to the board of directors, the major shareholders, and the compliance officers at our lending banks. Attached were the PDFs of the forged signatures, the transfers to the shell company, and the photos of the Miami villa. By the time the appetizers were served, everyone in that ballroom would know that Obsidian Dynamics was a hollow shell. We arrived at the Grand Hotel. The ballroom was dripping with crystals and filled with the city's elite. I walked beside Gavin, my hand resting lightly on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. He was scanning the room, looking for validation, for applause. I was scanning the perimeter. I saw Beatrice standing near the service entrance, looking elegant in a black evening gown. But I knew she was wearing a wire. I saw the waiters who looked a little too alert, the guests who were standing a little too still near the exits. The trap was set. Gavin leaned in close to my ear, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. He whispered that I should smile more because people were watching. He told me not to embarrass him. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who thought he was a king. He had no idea that the castle walls had already fallen. I widened my smile, showing him exactly what he wanted to see, and told him that I wouldn't dream of ruining his night. I told him that tonight was going to be unforgettable. He squeezed my arm, satisfied, and walked toward the stage to begin his performance, leaving me alone in the sea of red velvet and impending doom. I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and waited for the first domino to fall. Gavin stood at the podium, bathed in the golden glow of the stage lights, looking every inch the benevolent CEO. He leaned into the microphone, his voice thick with practiced emotion as he spoke about the sanctity of the home and the unyielding responsibility of a father to protect his legacy. He actually used the words moral compass while standing in front of 500 of Chicago's most influential people. I stood in the shadows of the wing, watching the irony drip from his lips like poison. The audience nodded in approval, completely unaware that the man preaching about family values had recently wagered his son's life against a weekend in Miami. Then, the double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a violent crash that silenced the room. Tiffany LaRue made her entrance. She was wearing a gown that was far too sheer and far too bright for a black-tie charity gala, a chaotic explosion of sequins that looked like a disco ball had exploded. She did not walk. She marched down the center aisle, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. The security guards, whom I had instructed to stand down, watched her pass without lifting a finger. Gavin froze mid-sentence. His eyes widened as he saw his two worlds colliding. He tried to laugh it off, stepping away from the podium to intercept her, but Tiffany was faster. She stormed up the stairs, grabbed the lapels of his tuxedo, and screamed that she was done waiting in the car. She demanded he tell everyone the truth right now. Gavin tried to push her away, hissing at her to be quiet, but she snatched the microphone from the stand. Her voice boomed through the speakers, shrill and desperate. She announced to the stunned crowd that Gavin was not just a family man, but her man, and that she was carrying his son. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. I knew it was a lie, a desperate, calculated fabrication to force a marriage, but the damage was instantaneous. Gavin looked like he was about to vomit. He reached for the mic, stammering denials, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. That was my cue. I pulled my phone from my clutch and pressed the execute button on the remote desktop app I had synced with the venue's audio-visual system. The massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the Obsidian Dynamics logo, flickered and cut to black. A second later, it roared to life with high-definition footage. It was the dashcam video from the police cruiser. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the concert-quality speakers. Gavin's voice filled the ballroom, arrogant and dismissive, telling the police officer that his wife was hysterical and that he had locked her inside to keep her from ruining his plans. Then came the audio from his tablet, a recording I had spliced in, where he laughed with Tiffany about liquidating the company assets to buy the villa. The silence in the room was absolute, followed immediately by a wave of murmurs that swelled into a roar of disgust. The board members in the front row stood up, their faces hardened with fury. The bankers who had loaned him millions looked at each other in panic. Gavin spun around to look at the screen, watching his own arrogance destroy him in real time. He looked small, trapped between the mistress who had exposed his infidelity and the video that exposed his crimes. I walked onto the stage. The click of my heels was the only sound that mattered now. I approached the pair of them. Tiffany was trembling. Realizing she had played her hand too hard, I reached out and took the microphone from her limp grip. She did not resist. I stood center stage, my red dress catching the light, and looked down at the sea of faces. I spoke calmly. I said that my husband seemed to have forgotten one minor detail in his speech about responsibility. I announced that Obsidian Dynamics no longer belonged to him. I pulled a folded document from my clutch and held it up. I explained that per the morality clause in our prenuptial agreement and the company bylaws regarding criminal misconduct, Gavin's arrest and the proven misappropriation of funds had triggered an automatic transfer of all executive power and controlling shares back to the original beneficiary. Me. I looked at Gavin, who was shaking with rage, and told the room that as the new CEO, my first act was to terminate Gavin for cause, effective immediately. The humiliation was too much for him. Gavin snapped. He let out a feral roar and lunged at me, his hands curled into claws, intending to hurt me in front of everyone. I did not flinch. I did not move. From the side of the stage, Beatrice stepped out from behind a velvet curtain. She didn't shout or panic. She simply extended her leg with the precision of a seasoned striker. Gavin tripped over her ankle. Momentum took over. He flew forward, arms flailing, and crashed face first onto the hard stage floor with a sickening thud. He slid a few feet, ending up at my feet, looking up at me from the ground, defeated and pathetic. The room erupted into chaos, but I stood still, looking down at the man who had once locked me in a cage, now lying in the ruin of his own making. The echo of Gavin's body hitting the stage had barely faded when the ballroom doors flew open for the second time that night. This time, it was not a mistress making a dramatic entrance, but the Economic Crimes Unit of the Chicago Police Department. They moved with a terrifying efficiency, swarming the stage in dark uniforms that contrasted sharply with the glittering evening wear of the guests. 2 officers hauled Gavin to his feet. He was dazed, blinking rapidly as the blood drained from his face. A detective stepped forward and read the warrant loud enough for the front row to hear. He was being charged with grand larceny, wire fraud, and money laundering on a massive scale. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists was the most satisfying sound I had heard since the breaking of the penthouse door. Tiffany tried to back away, her heels clicking nervously as she looked for an escape route, but Beatrice had anticipated this. She nodded to a female officer who stepped into Tiffany's path. When the officer grabbed her arm, Tiffany shrieked that she was innocent and that she did not know anything. The officer calmly informed her that she was under arrest for conspiracy and for receiving stolen property, specifically the $4.5 million villa in Miami and the luxury vehicles registered to her name. The diamonds on her fingers, purchased with stolen company funds, were now evidence. Gavin, realizing the walls were closing in, looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. He began to struggle against the officers, turning his body toward me. He begged me to stop this. He actually called me his darling. He told me to think about Noah. He said that a boy needs his father and that I could not let them take him away. He tried to weaponize the son he had abandoned in a freezing apartment to save his own skin. I walked closer to him, stopping just outside of his reach. I did not shout. I did not cry. I looked at him with absolute indifference. The room was silent, waiting for my verdict. I told him that he had locked me in our home so I could not save our son. I said that now I was locking him in prison, and he would never have the chance to harm anyone ever again. The officers turned him around and marched him off the stage. The press, who had been tipped off and were waiting in the lobby, burst through the doors, their cameras flashing like a lightning storm. Gavin tried to hide his face, but it was too late. The image of the arrogant CEO, disheveled and handcuffed, was captured forever. It was a stark contrast to the polished, powerful man who had stood there 10 minutes ago preaching about family values. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. As they dragged Tiffany past him, her facade of adoration crumbled completely. She did not look at him with love. She looked at him with pure venom. She screamed that he was a liar and a fraud. She yelled that he had promised her he was rich, and now she was going to jail because of his incompetence. Their great romance, built on greed and deceit, died the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. Once the police had cleared the stage, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. The shock wore off, replaced by a palpable sense of realignment. The chairman of the board, a man who had previously dismissed my concerns as marital squabbles, walked up to me. He looked ashamed. He took my hand and apologized profusely, telling me that the board was behind me 100%. He said they were ready to follow my lead to clean up this mess. One by one, the investors and partners approached, pledging their loyalty to me and to the company's future. The room slowly emptied until only the staff remained to clean up the debris of the gala. Beatrice walked over to a deserted catering table and picked up 2 glasses of untouched champagne. She handed one to me. We stood amidst the ruins of Gavin's ego, the red carpet stained with spilled wine and the echoes of justice served. We clinked our glasses together. The nightmare was over. The storm had passed, and for the first time in years, the air I breathed felt entirely my own. The wheels of justice usually turn slowly, but when you have a mountain of digital evidence and a viral video of the defendant confessing to his crimes, they spin like a turbine. It took only 3 months to seal Gavin's fate. The trial was a blur of prosecutors and stunned jurors. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly seen the footage of my shivering son, showed no mercy. She sentenced Gavin to 15 years in a maximum security facility without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led him away, he looked back at me one last time, but I was already looking past him. Tiffany did not fare much better. While she avoided prison time by turning state's evidence, the court stripped her of everything. They seized the villa, the luxury cars, and every piece of jewelry Gavin had bought her with stolen funds. She was left with nothing but a criminal record and a reputation that made her a pariah in the city. Last I heard, she was working double shifts as a waitress at a roadside diner, living in a small studio apartment, completely shunned by the high society she had tried so desperately to infiltrate. With the parasites removed from my life, I was free to rebuild. I took the helm of Obsidian Dynamics, but the name felt tainted, heavy with the weight of Gavin's fraud. I decided to burn the old identity to the ground. I rebranded the company as Phoenix Ventures, symbolizing our rise from the ashes of betrayal. Under my leadership, we shifted focus to legitimate, transparent investments. The stock price didn't just recover, it soared. The first personal decision I made was to sell the penthouse at Sterling Heights. I could not live in a glass box that had almost become our tomb. I bought a warm, sprawling house in the suburbs with creaky floorboards, yellow walls, and a massive backyard where Noah could run until his cheeks turned pink. Noah was completely healed now, his lungs clear and his laughter loud. He stopped asking about his father weeks ago. In his world, family was me, and it was Beatrice who came over every Sunday for dinner. I wanted to ensure no other woman felt the terrifying isolation I had felt that night. I used a portion of the recovered assets to establish a non-profit organization called Noah's Shield. We provided emergency legal aid, secure housing, and technology sweeps for women and children escaping domestic abuse. It was my way of turning our nightmare into someone else's lifeline. Yesterday afternoon, the sun was streaming through the living room windows when the mail arrived. There was a letter from the state penitentiary. The handwriting on the envelope was jagged and familiar. It was Gavin, begging for a final visitation, likely to ask for money or forgiveness. I stood by the fireplace, holding the envelope. I did not open it. I did not need his closure. I tossed the envelope into the flames and watched the paper curl, blacken, and disappear. Then, I looked at my left hand. The gold wedding band was still there, a circle of metal that felt heavier than a shackle. I pulled it off. It slid over my knuckle with ease. I threw it into the heart of the fire. The heat was intense, and I watched as the gold began to soften, losing its perfect shape until it was nothing but a formless lump of metal among the ashes. I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the mantel. The woman staring back was not a victim. She was strong, she was beautiful, and for the first time in her life, she was truly free. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my trance. Beatrice walked in, carrying a bag of flour and a carton of eggs. Noah ran to her, hugging her legs and shouting with joy. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchen, covered in white flour, baking chocolate chip cookies. The house smelled of vanilla and sugar, erasing the memory of sandalwood and fear. As the sun set, I walked to the front door to lock up for the night. I touched the new smart keypad. It was not a tool for control anymore. It was a barrier against the world, keeping the good things in and the bad things out. I punched in the new code, which was Noah's birthday. I heard the bolt slide home with a solid, reassuring thud, and I turned back to the warmth of my real home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below to share your thoughts and let us chat. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and share the video so more people can hear this story.